Thanks everyone for being here. Hopefully this will be interesting and informative. First, we're going to discuss some considerations for framing research questions. We'll do a little bit of an activity, and then we're going to talk about how you can integrate research with your teaching practice. And then we'll close by talking about a case study, which will hopefully give you some ideas for your own research. So like I said, we're going to first do a deep dive into how to frame research questions. First, though, we're going to talk about some considerations for framing research questions. So first off, there's novelty. So you want any research question you ask to be informed by prior literature in the field, but you also want it to have enough of a substantive new kind of twist on it that it's still adding something that's new and informative. It also has to have enough specificity for it to actually be measurable. And it also has to be appropriately scoped. So if you want to do a study that in order to answer your research question, you need tons of statistical power. Well, right here we have 450 students. Probably not all of them are going to participate in your study. So it might not be the right place to do that kind of experiment. So you want to make sure that the scope is appropriate to your own time constraints and whatever resource constraints that you have. And then, will any result be interesting? So just to give you an example from neuroscience, let's say I ask a research question that's like, when mice watch cartoons, do they have more neurons that project from their retina to their visual thalamus after they've watched tons of cartoons in their early life? And if it turns out that the answer is yes, then that's pretty interesting. I could publish that. If I find out that actually there's the same number of neurons that project before and after their cartoon watching, then that's probably not worth publishing. That's not too interesting. But I could also ask a question that says, if we take mice from birth and rear them in a completely dark environment where they have no visual input, do they have more or fewer or no change in the number of neurons projecting from their retina to their visual thalamus? Sorry, I know this is dense. But the point is that if it turns out that there's no change, that's also interesting. So here we have a situation where negative results are still informative and publishable. So that's the ideal. We can't always ask a research question that meets all of these, but that's what we're shooting for. Just to give an example for us to work with, let's say I have a research question: how much parental guidance is optimal for students who are in a museum? So how could we adjust this research question a little bit to be a little better in light of some of those considerations? Do people have ideas? Took an actual question from a research paper, and they asked, does the number of goal-directed statements from a parent affect how often their child is going to complete problems once the child is then on their own? And so, this was done at the New York Hall of Science. It's a specific type of exhibit. Presumably, they constrain the age range, although I don't remember that part. But you can see how you can take this question that is very interesting, but make it a little bit more concrete. Talk about 3 ways to integrate research and teaching. The first way that I'm going to talk about is teaching as research. So this involves if you're already, doing something in a class or in your advising practice, and you want to actually figure out, is it working? What's going on? And so you do your intervention, whatever it is, and then you're also collecting data on how it's going. You might ask, does my new curriculum module increase neurodivergent students' sense of belonging? You could administer a pre and post assessment to assess student confidence or their content knowledge. You could collect longitudinal data about students. And you can also parse and analyze student responses. So maybe you're recording students during group work sessions or during the things they say in class. And then you're taking those transcripts and you're analyzing perhaps themes that are coming out or the types of statements that students make to try to figure out things about, say, their STEM identity. Another thing you can do is the classroom as laboratory. So this is essentially a course-based undergraduate research experience where in the context of an undergraduate class, students have the chance to actually do original research. So for example, this might look like taking the intro bio lab and saying, instead of just learning how to do PCRs, we're gonna have students ask the question, what previously uncharacterized phages exist in the soil on Putney Mountain? So students are still gaining lab skills, but they're also getting an original research experience that if everything goes really well, they could even publish on. You can also advise independent studies. So say you have a student who's really interested in how does college students with ADHD engage with career services, then you can let that student actually pursue that research question while you advise them and help them turn that into a project. So in terms of a case study, I wanted to tell you about this group at Wellesley that does a 1-week immersive biochemistry week. And it kind of incorporates all of these different approaches for the undergrads. So in order to design new curriculum modules for this week-long immersive session, they work with undergrads who do like an independent study essentially for a semester and design the curriculum themselves. And then so those are usually upper class people. And then during the winter session week, the students are actually doing original research in this biochemistry class, so they get that experience. And then all the while that that's going on, the researchers running the class are also collecting data from the students on how their attitudes about STEM are changing. So they ask them about, what's your confidence level in terms of designing your own experiments? And then they collect that pre and post data, and they are able to publish on that. And then they're also able to publish on the process for having the undergrad develop the curriculum in the first place. And so those are 2 different papers, and they all result out of these 3 kind of different pieces that end up also being a really impactful experience for students as well. So this is just to give you an idea of how these different elements can work in conjunction. This is the first Strive workshop, but we're going to have a lot more. And they'll focus on things like how to seek funding, on qualitative and quantitative methods. And we also really want to hear from you about the kinds of content that you want to see in workshops, which is why we would love for you to take the last few minutes of the session and just fill out this quick survey.